Hello YouTube, this is Sam Gerrans from Qur'anite.com. Today is Saturday 20th October 2018 and today I'm going to attempt another short video and we'll see how that one goes. But what I want to address is the question of why I avoid specific questions. I get a lot of questions, a lot of mail, and some of it I reply to, some of it I don't reply to, but in my line as it is now, you tend to get, and I wasn't expecting this, but now I do get it, quite a lot of very specific questions. Things like, for example, and I've just made a short list that off the top of my head here that I remember. Are wigs haram? Can you wash your hands when we're wearing nail polish? Does that invalidate wudu? Can you get married over Skype? Can you use plastic surgery? And many, many different types of questions. And frankly, I avoid these questions, and there are several reasons why, and I'm going to explain this. And one of the reasons why I'm making this video is so that I can just send this again to people. I have there is another video out there that I did. I'm not a mullah and I don't want to be one, something like that. Well, this is kind of a shorter, I hope, version of the same thing. This is going to explain my reasoning. Firstly, and this was an education to me, there are historical reasons why Muslims or people from an Islamic background do this. You see, to me, I come originally from a Christian culture, at least. We don't have this so much. For example, in Christianity, prayer, how people pray, how the Unitarians pray and how the Catholics pray and how the Pentecostals pray. There'll be quite a large divergence over that, but it's not like, how do you pray, brother? There's this one way of praying, and I'm going to cut the throats of anybody who doesn't pray the way I pray. I stand with my hands down by my side or on my over my chest, or are they too high or too I mean, obviously there are Christians who are a bit like this, but not to the same extent. And obviously it's Christian cultures, Christian lands which have provided all of the innovation, all of the creative innovation that's driving everything in the world. I mean, just historically, the word innovation, from in a brand Islam point of view, it's you can land you in a lot of trouble. Bid'ah, this is bid'ah. Everything is innovation. Obviously, the Islamic countries, they like innovation when it suits them. Well, Islamic, in inverted commas. What I'm trying to say is that it's a minefield, and one with absolutely no consistency to it at all. And my task isn't to get involved in that. And it's certainly not what I set out to do. I see my job very differently. My first task is to analyze the Qur'an and to present my findings, the results of my own process of due diligence for other people to consider. See, I'm not trying to build up this huge following or trying to start a cult or anything like that. I'm just doing my own work. The Qur'an calls us to consider it with care. Had I found something that had done that work when I first began reading it, I wouldn't be doing this, but I couldn't see it, so I attempted it myself. And I understand that for a lot of people, that's the height of arrogance, that I should have the temerity to wish to use my own mind in order to prepare for death and eternity. This is somehow an arrogance beyond all, any kind of conception. But I don't care. I'm doing it, whoever, whether people like it or not. But what I found is that some small people, small group of people, a small amount of people, I've got 5,000, people on YouTube. This is 4,000 something, I can't remember. But this is in the sort of greater scheme of things, this is obviously nothing. But I still think it's worth it, because I always knew, Quranically speaking, that you're really looking for and sort of looking to help, if it's possible, the few. It's always the few. It's just, Quranically speaking, large numbers are rarely the thing. It does happen. I think it's an-nasr. Yes, when you see people enter into the deen, into the doctrine in crowds, it does happen, but it's the exception rather than the rule. So that's what I'm sort of working towards, is trying to sort of deal with reality as it is. So my job has been to present my findings as best I can, and also to get not to compromise on that, because in this line that I've chosen, I mean, you have to accept that there's a risk factor involved, and your career might come to a screeching halt at some point. Well, if that's the case, then I'm going to say exactly what I think and to not compromise. And that's been my position. It remains my position. So that's the first part. The second part is, as I say, try to get that analysis to a group of engaged and bright people while filtering out the sort of the masses as much as possible. Not because it's elitist or anything like that. It's just that I'm looking, my videos require a certain amount of attention, and why do I sort of make these reasonably long videos, which I could have, cut, intersect, fade to black, with lots of whirly, giggly pictures and so on, and keep it all very entertaining. Well, how are people going to go from that to my 536, 1,000 word book? It's too much of a leap. So what I'm trying to do is make it sort of easier here, but not so easy that people go from this to my work and they're just completely lost. So, I have to sort of stagger it. And my hope is that in time, people will start to present parts of my work, in Kim Kardashian-esque terms, that people who have got, no attention span, I'm not being horrible about them, just stating the fact. I mean, look around you, look at people walking up and down the street. They can hardly move now without looking at a screen. And their cognitive functions, their attention span is almost gone to nothing. They're just, I'm not being horrible, I'm very sorry for them, but they're not my, in marketing terms, they're not my audience. They're not my sort of target audience. I'm looking for people who, can read and think and those things, because they're the people who can do something with what I've done. So they're the people that I'm concentrating on. I'm not really interested in people who want to find somebody with a beard to tell them whether or not they should wash their hands when they've, been to the lavatory and stuff like that. So that's part of it. A part of my process also is to outline the God protocol, to finish that work and to explain it. And if possible, I hope to present an example on whatever level that becomes possible of executing on that, on delivering on that. Not that this is the sort of the be-all and end-all, or that it's necessarily the only time this is going to happen, but so that the concept is there and people understand this, because that's what I'm trying to do. So those are my sort of key concerns. Something else is to, I suppose, to help people start thinking for themselves, especially people who come from culturally brand Islamic backgrounds where, let's be honest, there isn't really much of a culture of that. There used to be, and I'm not personally waxing, sort of lyrical about the glory days of Islam, but it is true that Islamic culture was a high culture, and this was before everything had coalesced to such an extent and almost, ossified around dogmatism, when things were still flexible, where people still had opinions and used to reason, and also, I suppose, where there was more grist to the mill. I mean, there were Christians and Jews and all kinds of different factions around, people you actually had to reason with. The Islamic so-called world hasn't had to do that except at the very edges for a very long time, so they're out of practice, and it shows. So, and I suppose another thing is to, if it's possible, to lead by example to the extent of standing up, using my own name, my own face, presenting my findings and exercising whatever intelligence I may or may not have to the best of my ability. And I've never claimed and do not claim to have the definitive answer on any question. All I've done is presented a system of hermeneutics that can be improved upon, but it takes a lot of work, you see, and that's why people don't really do that. They'll have their theories, but I'm talking about actually going through meticulously and going through and doing all the spade work. And if you want a rough estimate on how long that's going to take, you can estimate it's going to take about 3 or 4 years of full-time work. People haven't got the time, and if they did have the time, they wouldn't do it. And I understand that. So I was presenting the best that I could do, and this is the best that I can do. And if somebody, improves upon it, great. But that's been my focus. You see, my focus has not been about sort of being a replacement for your local mullah. I have made a longer video, and I'll probably link to it at the end of this one, or in the drop down below or something on this subject. But I do feel I want to kind of address this specific thing of not answering people's, questions of fiqh, because this isn't what I'm about, you see. However, having said all of that, I'm not saying that it's always bad for people to form groups. I don't think that at all. Again, just harking back to the Christian culture, which is the culture that I'm personally from, in the monastic culture, and I'm not extolling this as an example, I'm just giving it as an example. We had Benedictine monks, Franciscan monks, various types of orders, and there would be the rule of Benedict, for example, which would be, in fact I've got a copy of it somewhere, a system of disciplines that a man would willingly submit to in order to practice his Christianity. Now, I don't have a problem with this concept at all, and for people to form or join an order. Where it becomes problematic is that it, especially latterly, and this was not always the case, but has always had some problems to it, but it wasn't always as big a problem as it is now. Islamically, in the Islamic world, when things were still much more fluid, people were able to learn from this person, learn from that person, etc., and join orders, and without it all being sort of mutually exclusive, and you have to go around chopping off the heads of the infidel. It's not that I think that all beliefs and all paths are equally valid. I don't think that at all. But human beings are different. They have, various types of characteristics. They have things that they're more inclined to. They have things which are better suited to their temperaments, and so on. And this is just reality. And so I'm not saying that nobody should ever join a group of any kind. I do say that we are responsible for using our own minds, and you can use your own mind whether you wish to join this or that order. That's fine, but I'm not saying it's necessarily bad. I'm just saying that that's not my role here, certainly at this time. So I see life personally, if you're asking my opinion, and this is what it is I see this life really as a workshop. It's not so much about which workshop you're in. It's more about what you make when you're in it. And of course, there are certain advantages to being in a workshop where you have the latest electronic lathe or whatever it is. But a good workman will produce something good, no matter what. And this is the way that I see it. Of course, there are circumstances which are conducive to producing good or better things than in other places. So going back to mainstream, and I call it mainstream Islam because this is really a historical culture, which is gone now. It's gone. It exists as a sort of tourist attraction in the mind of something that may or may not have existed in the way that it's conceived of today. But what is true, certainly, is that it was possible for people to follow, different paths, different orders within that, and perhaps it's still possible to a certain extent. The kind of brand Islam that I decry and that I inveigh against is really, I think, a construct, frankly, if you want my honest opinion, of Western intelligence agencies, and they're using unthinking young men usually to advance agendas. And this isn't the first time that they've used unthinking young men to advance agendas. Unthinking young men are basically the almost the staple of how elites get things done. So I don't see anything unusual in that. However, today everything has become polarized and made instantaneous. So everyone's got an opinion about everything. Just in my own very small sort of world, as I mentioned in the last video, I occasionally come across stuff online, people talking about me, and absolutely wrongly representing my ideas, and they've got an opinion. They've picked 3 words, or they haven't even read anything. They've heard somebody else saying something, and then they've got 3 words about something and it's just, whoa. And you just have to let it go. But that's how it is now. People aren't going to do the work, and they're not going to, most people are not going to read what I've done, and I understand all that. So it's not that I don't, well, I do not care. No, you're right. I don't care about everybody because I can't. I haven't got the strength. I care and focus on people who are engaged in it, and that's the extent of it. I can't, as we say in Russian, I can't jump higher than my own head. It's not possible. So I'm just explaining why I don't get into all of this. So my last thoughts on this, I've got a few notes here I'm reading from, obviously. I think that the online mullah role is wrong, at least for me. I know there are people out there doing it, and they've got books and books and books of hadith, and they'll say, the Prophet Muhammad as-salam alayhi wa salam, he said, you must only use a miswak on the Thursday after the second full moon of whatever it is, and blood. To me, it's nonsense. The Qur'an calls us to use our minds. It says that we should submit. You were supposed to use our own brains. This is it. It's pretty simple. And if you're going to get into the specifics of it, quite honestly, the answer 9 times out of 10 is think for yourself, use your own brain, and engage your conscience. You pretty much go pretty right with that. If you know the Quranic principles and you're not breaking any of those principles, you see the water is wide. It's this hudud Allah, and I've talked about this before. This is a very broad river. It's not some little rivulet. It's the Mississippi, and as long as you're not approaching these 2 sides, you can do what you want. But people aren't happy with you can do what you want. It really freaks them out. It frightens them. They feel that there has to be this one specific answer on this one specific question. Use your own brain is, that's the answer to nearly everything. Now, having said all of that, but taking into consideration what I've said about an order, and there are people who wish to submit their lives at a higher level. We know that there are darajat, there are degrees, and so on. But just because somebody takes, as it were, holy orders, to use a Christianism, doesn't mean that everybody else is a bad person. You can live a righteous and a good, and in fact a better life as what the Hindus would call a householder. And that's a discipline. We're not all called to be, whatever it is. We've got different characteristics. If God had wanted us all to be identical, he would have made us into drones. Or he would have made us pretty much into what the New World Order elite are trying to turn us into now. People who are fairly, globalized and standardized. But we're not made that way. We are made with a different sets of characteristics and, empathies and sympathies, and we just know that we are. And so that's why I fight shy of, what people try to get me involved in with this sort of pastoral role. Now, the other reason is you don't know the individual. People think they know you. And this is one of the characteristics of micro fame. I'm sure everyone's had the experience. You'll be walking down the street and you think, oh, Mark, that's Robert De Niro or whoever it is, somebody famous. I mean, macro famous, something really famous. And unless you've thought about what you're going to do the next time you see a really famous person, and you've already got that there as a sort of mental subroutine already in place, then it's very easy to kind of fall apart, and just go, oh, you're Robert De Niro or whatever it is, aren't you? And Robert De Niro is going to go, yeah, because he gets it all day long. You see, everybody thinks they know him, and he doesn't know those people, and so this is something that happens, and because it's on a screen, even though in my very sort of humble way, somehow it keys into a triggered process. People see you on a screen, they think they know you, and therefore they think that you're going to meet meet all of these expectations. You're just a guy. You're just a person using his brain, trying to do the best that he can, and that's really what I'm trying to sort of share, as it were. But to get back to the sort of the pastoral role, when it comes to it, I don't know the people who write to me. I mean, I know them, they send me an email, blah, blah, blah. It's not enough to go on to give people life advice. Now, I can speak as an individual. I can give my personal opinion as an individual, but I'm only really going to do that when I know the person. And for me, internet it's not community. It's a pseudo community, but it isn't community. Community, I'll tell you what community is. How the Amish live. That's community. Or even how Hasidic Jews in New York, how they live. Well, not even, definitely. That's a community. Now, in that environment, it's different. If you're if you're asked to by a community to take a pastoral role, that's a completely different matter. You know the people involved. You know the families. You know little Joey and what his brothers are like. And you can of course you can advise as one gets older. Hopefully, one gets wiser. You can offer some advice. You can share your experience and those sorts of things. You see, so it's not that I'm fundamentally against giving any sort of advice, but I am against giving this sort of passing out this almost legal advice on these subjects, when the Qur'an is very clear about that we are supposed to think for ourselves, and it gives us these hudud Allah, but are there instances where some more detailed advice might be useful? Sure, of course there are, but they're not legal judgments. They're one brother giving advice to another brother or sister or so on. But my personal opinion is that the right place for that is in the community, real community, and this ain't it. The other part of it is you can be quoted out of context. And believe me, in my, what I do now, the snippets that I see people passing around, it's just ludicrous. But it's not something I want to get into. And I don't see it as being necessary. I don't see the Qur'an calling us to this as a legal system. Sure, one could develop a legal system, but it's a legal system based perhaps within the framework of the Qur'an. Is the Qur'an permanent? Yes. Is the legal system permanent? No. If you can make a better one, make one. People don't like this. They want certainty on the nail polish question, on the getting married over Skype question. And once you go down that road, you see, then you start having precedent, and before you know it, you're swimming in quick setting cement. And I can see that. I know that's how it works. And I'm just not, I'm not up for that. I think it's a foolish path, and that's why I avoid it. I don't mean it as an insult, and it doesn't mean that I, can't sympathize with people's, anguish. But most of the time, the answer is, go for a long walk and think about it. And think about, what would I tell somebody else? If somebody asked me this, what would seem a reasonable answer? And, based on your experience of the Qur'an, look at it, is it really important here? Does it seem to be important whether I wear, nail varnish or not when I wash my hands? And come to an opinion for yourself. And it's, once we start making, this is quite a shock for me, see, that the bar was this low. But, this is what we're meant to do. And if you think that it's wrong to think for yourself, then why did God create you? Why didn't he just make you into an automaton? Now, it doesn't mean you can't learn. We are all learning, and we can all be wrong about things, and we can all change our opinions and so on and so forth. But, I think that using one's mind is a holy thing. And I don't exalt, intellect and above revelation. But we are meant to bring the one to the other. That's my opinion, and I hope explains it. So that's really it in a nutshell. if you get a link to this, it means that you've sent me some question, along these lines, and rather than me trying to explain it 100 times, which I don't have time to, and I don't really want to ignore people because I feel that it's rude. I hope that you can take this in the spirit that I'm making it, and you can understand that perhaps there is another way forward than just sort of looking to an expert, because look at what the experts have brought you to thus far, and is it really so terrible to think that you might be able to do a little bit better for yourself? It's worth thinking about. That's all for now. If you're listening on YouTube, you can download my full translation of the Qur'an free using the button in the top right hand corner, or buy the hard copy there at 10% less than on Amazon. I also encourage you to sign up for the Qur'anite Plus newsletter on the site to get occasional micro updates. You can download the audio from my YouTube videos to your mobile device using the links in the drop down below. I recommend meetquranites.com to connect with other Qur'an alone believers. Like if you like, comment if you have something constructive to say, and subscribe to get more each week. And use the link in the drop down below to donate if you would like to help me keep doing this. And remember, this life is short, eternity is long. If you want good trees, plant good seeds.